Welcome once again to Norse Code, episode 56, from the center of the polar vortex. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, and I'm here with our regular analyst and my fellow host, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Yeah, I'm good. How's the polar vortex?
This November 12th was the coldest November 12th in like 100 years in Denver.
Yeah, I hope you get some newspaper. I hear that's taped off polar vortices. Vortices.
Did you learn that in The Day After Tomorrow?
Yes, in the phenomenal, wonderful movie The Day After Tomorrow. Just gotta bunch up some newspaper or make fun of Nietzsche.
Was Minneapolis? I mean, I don't. The center of my world is Denver. It should be the center of everybody's world, but it's not. Was the polar vortex, attack Minneapolis, like the mindless, malevolent force that it is?
The edges of it, so the tendrils of the polar vortex. Yeah, it's something like 20 degrees here right now, I think, which is like coldish for this time of year, but it's not like insane, I guess. It's like mid-November. You expect snow in Minneapolis.
Well, mark your calendar, because it's one of those rare times where it's actually colder, significantly colder in Denver than it is in Minneapolis. It's like 3 degrees here right now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Because Denver always gets more snow, but Minneapolis is definitely colder on average.
Well, this is the day before the day after tomorrow world we live in. which actually, that would be the world of tomorrow. 2 days before the day after tomorrow would be the world that we live in.
Which is a couple days after next week.
Which is today.
A couple days before next week.
In case you weren't keeping track at home. Not much of a football week. There not being a Vikings game was not the only reason it was a lame football week. It seemed like it was a bunch of good teams playing a bunch of bad teams. I mean, even I went like 10-3 with my pick set this week.
Yeah. What's crazy, though, is the week wreaked havoc on the models, which is actually good news for me because it was the 1 week I couldn't get any bets in because my laptop wasn't working because the AC adapter caught on fire. So,
oh my, you have seriously terrible laptop luck. Like it was a joke a year ago that my laptop was a flake, but you have it's been multiple devices, and this curse seems to follow you around.
Yeah, no, I have consistently bad laptop luck, and it doesn't matter the brand either because it's gone through Hewlett-Packard, which, by the way, I recommend people do not buy, Dell, and Lenovo. And the last two of those are actually both very good brands of computer, anyway.
Yeah, I suggest I've owned Dell, and I guess my ThinkPad was an IBM. That kind of dates me, but I would recommend those brands to anyone. And yet, they're starting on fire. They're just turning off and never turning on again. Like are you particularly hard on your laptop? Do you throw it downstairs before you follow it walking downstairs?
I used to be pretty cavalier with my laptop safety back when I was a collegiate debater, but the problems started before I was reckless with it, and then also after I stopped being reckless with it. So I would not argue that. Well, it also wouldn't explain why the AC adapter caught on fire this time, right? Especially because I don't move that much, and I mostly stay indoors all day, and I don't travel very much, and so I really couldn't tell you why the AC adapter just. Also, so it burns red orange for a second, but then it burns bright green because there's copper inside. So that's
because I think the battery is mostly copper inside. Yeah, there you go. Isn't red sodium?
Maybe there's something in their
red flame
vulcanized rubber that because that's what burned first, and then I got to the copper wiring inside because the problem was a spark that set the rubber on fire that then came back to the copper.
Escalated, yeah.
Yeah. I was able to blow it out. It wasn't a huge fire or anything like that. It was just, it was kind of weird because the AC adapter was plugged into my laptop, and so the cord in the middle of the air is catching fire. It's surreal, right?
Yeah, and there's just something like inherently scary about the sound of a spark, like that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, no, so it's a spark, and I was like, what the shit was that? Whatever. And I start smelling something. I'm like, oh, huh. Like,
Oh yeah, but that smelled fantastic.
oh, it's the worst smell. But for a second, I was like, why am I smelling burning tires? Because it's rubber, right? But then I saw smoke, and I was like, that is super weird. Pot does not smell like this, and because my roommate smoked pot, right? And I was like, that's so weird. And then I look and my AC adapter's on fire.
So it was not the sour diesel they were smoking.
Right.
It was actual petroleum products burning.
Yeah. Accurate. It was literal petroleum.
You're a senior writer for Vikings Journal and the editor of Vikings Territory, and it sounds like you are dragging your fellow, well, maybe not dragging, maybe carrying would be a better word to describe what you're doing to your fellow writers in terms of their TV careers.
Yeah, Lindsay showed up on Carol Levin's Viking Extra show. She did a fantastic job, providing content on the bye week, breaking down sort of the things that Vikings fans can be sort of optimistic about and pessimistic about. It's a good piece that she did. She aired something like 5 minutes on Carol Levin, and then another 10 to 15 minutes, 15 minutes actually, online. It's all hosted at VikingsTerritory.com.
So that's what's been happening there, I suppose. We've had a little bit of forward motion on the players' union's grievance about the league's handling of Adrian Peterson's reinstatement. Sounds like we'll have a ruling on that on Monday after the game against the Bears.
Yeah, well, we won't necessarily have a ruling on that on Monday. So as soon as the NFLPA files for an expedited non-injury grievance, of which they have 4 a year to file, so they can file obviously as many grievances as they want, but the expedited thing, they can only do 4 times a year. So the NFL has to grant a hearing in front of an arbitrator with the NFLPA and the NFL and Adrian Peterson, although they don't have to be in the same room. It can be conducted over phone or whatever. That has to be granted within 5 days of the filing. And so the NFL has decided to delay it as long as possible. So on the 5th, so Monday, actually, which is stupid, but that's what they did. But then the arbitrator also has an additional 5 days to decide after that. And, depending on sort of, if it's 5 business days, and whatever, it may not actually be resolved until the arbitrator may not have to make a decision until the day of, on Sunday, or if it's business days, on Monday again. And so we may not have a decision until after the Green Bay Packers game, although I think that's unlikely. It's pretty open and shut. The arbitrator should probably just decide right away. By the way, that arbitrator, former MLB arbitrator between the MLBPA and the MLB let him go after he ruled correctly in the Ryan Braun drug suspension case. And the MLBPA was like, that's ridiculous. He definitely made the right decision, and the MLB let him go.
That kind of answers the question of whether or not the arbitrator is like a league employee or otherwise in the pocket of the league or having the appearance of being in the pocket of the league. This guy has a reputation as a fair dealer.
Yeah, he's definitely a neutral arbitrator. In these cases, both parties have to agree to the arbitrator and can suspend their relationship with that arbitrator at any time. He was an MLB arbitrator for 13 years. The MLBPA and the MLB were both happy with him until he made that decision, which I think is kind of silly to fire a neutral arbitrator for a specific decision they made. But there you go.
It's not like the arbitration agreement that you sign when you sign a new cell phone contract that gives the company the right to pick whatever arbitrator they want in their dispute with you.
Right. It's not like that.
That's good. That's reassuring. So, well, we might cease forward motion as soon as Monday, but it could be a week from now. And I hear or see rumors of potentially as much as a 6-game suspension still coming down the pike. It sounds like the NFL doesn't think that this exempt list or kind of purgatory status while still being paid counts as punishment.
It's interesting because it's very difficult to sort of figure things out. So the NFL doesn't consider it as punishment. They said as much. But I find it hard to believe they won't provide some level of leniency versus if they had to make a suspension decision the day they found out, right? Like, I can't imagine the number of games he suspended would match the number of games he would have been suspended if they made a suspension decision sort of in week 2, right? Another thing I would think of is that Adrian is really close to having a credited season, because to have a credited season as a veteran in the NFL, you only need 3 games. It's not like, getting accrued seasons for determining practice squad eligibility or restricted free agent eligibility or anything like that, where you need 6 games. You only need 3 games to have, an NFL year for the purposes of gaining, experience on sort of the minimum veterans pay list, the number of years that you have that count towards that, the number of years that count towards particular levels of retirement benefits, and so forth. You only need, 2 more games. So that might be a consideration. So I wouldn't be surprised if after the arbitrator rules, which I assume to be after the Chicago game and not after the Green Bay game, that they will maybe suspend him for 4 games, and then he'll have the final 2 games of the year to be active. And also the 6-game thing, a lot of people are taking that from the domestic violence policy, which doesn't apply, even though it has the word child somewhere in it, because the domestic violence policy itself very explicitly is about spousal abuse and not about other forms of domestic violence, which this just so happens to fall under. And like, given sort of the exemption thing, and I don't know, maybe given the fact that it was pled down to a misdemeanor, though I doubt, because the NFL say that they take these into account, but they often don't. The most recent example that the Vikings can remember would be the Jerome Simpson case. The NFL was able to slap on another suspension for Jerome Simpson for violating probation, even though the charge that he was charged with did not contain any alcohol-related problems. He was charged with reckless driving and refusing to submit to a chemical test. There were no test results for what Jerome Simpson did, but it's generally understood, given the facts of the case, that Jerome Simpson violated another level of the NFL substance abuse policy and therefore was suspended again. So I don't think the NFL will take into account all that much in terms of whether or not he was a misdemeanor, but it's something to think about if you're the NFL. And then also it is getting very difficult for them to get access to the facts of the case, because after court records are sealed, neither party, the prosecutor or the prosecutor/district attorney or the defendant, are theoretically legally allowed to give that information to other parties like the NFL. Although I imagine any pretrial documentation they can get, and they still haven't gotten that. So we'll see.
A little bit of sad news for longtime fans of the Vikings. I remember watching Orlando Thomas play when I was first getting into the Vikings back in the Randall Cunningham era. Orlando Thomas passed away from complications resulting from ALS, which I didn't know he had. What a terrible disease.
Yeah.
Thomas was 42, also the jersey number he wore while roaming the defensive secondary from 1995 until 2001. He was a starter on both the 1998 and 2000 teams that went to the NFC Championship, and ended his Vikings career with 22 picks, 6 forced fumbles, 1.5 career sacks. His 22 picks are tied for 7th all-time in team history with John Turner. He ranks 3rd all-time in team history for interceptions by his safety, trailing only Hall of Famer Paul Krause and Ring of Honor member Joey Browner, per an article by Ted Glover at the Daily Norseman.
Interesting note, those 1.5 sacks came in those 1998 and 2000 seasons.
That is an interesting fact.
Yeah.
Another interesting fact, Norse Code is one of the few sports podcasts out there that is entirely listener-supported. We are reliant on the public radio model of hassling you to give us money to keep the lights on and keep the Norse Code servers a-hummin', and let us continue bringing you this podcast.
Do we have pretentious mugs and canvas bags to give out? I'm a Norse Code member.
I support Norse Code. I don't know. Would that be something anyone would buy? I mean, if a cafe press shop is trivial to set up. If people want T-shirts, we can do T-shirts. We can do mugs. It is the holidays are coming up. We could even do a Black Friday special, and we wouldn't have to make retail gnomes work on a holiday or the day after a holiday.
Yeah, that's something you're interested in. Just email us or something.
Yeah, shoot us an email. Mention something on Twitter if Norse Code paraphernalia is something that you would like. Yeah, we could have donation levels, and we could come up with really pretentious names for recurring donors.
Oh yeah, you're a member of our President's Club, our Ring of Honor. Ooh, I like that.
Exactly. We could have our own Ring of Honor. We could get Ira Glass and Alec Baldwin to cut like really obnoxious promos for us.
Yeah, we could do that if you gave us guys a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Then we can take over the world one podcast at a time and then move on to more traditional forms of media. And it all starts with you, our listener, giving us $5 once for a lifetime subscription to Norse Code. If you think that the 2 hours of content that we produce, because it ends up being about 2 hours every week.
Well, we shoot for 1.5, but yeah.
It ends up being closer to 145, usually 2 hours if we have a good guest. At any rate, for $5, that is a pretty good value for your money. I went and saw Interstellar at the IMAX theater a couple nights ago. Phenomenal movie. If you like anything that Christopher Nolan has ever done, then I strongly recommend it. Neil deGrasse Tyson gave an impromptu review of it on Twitter and gave a bit of a nod to some of the science advising that happened to make Interstellar possible.
Yeah, I heard half of the science in there was like very good and very genuine, and the other half was so off the wall that he didn't even care.
Well, yeah, it's obviously like a fictional movie or whatever. And I don't know, it's very hard to talk about without spoiling, so I'm just not going to. The only reason I brought it up, well, one, to brag that I had seen it and recommend that you see it. And if you have an opportunity to see it in IMAX, do so, because the entire movie is shot on IMAX 70mm film. Like it's not like there aren't the big black bars at the top and bottom of the IMAX screen. It is 30 stories of glory. And when you see the spherical black hole for the first time, it's worth it. But when I say it, I mean $18. $18.
Well, I mean, you saw it in IMAX, right? So
yeah, exactly. $18 for an IMAX movie ticket. And I mean, that movie was quite long. It was almost 3 hours.
Back in my day, movies only cost a nickel.
Well, the point I'm making is that an episode of Norse Code may not be quite as long as Interstellar at an IMAX theater.
It's also not nearly as good. Are you serious? It's not nearly as good.
That's true, but it is a significantly better value for your entertainment dollar. If
it is at least a third as good, it is a phenomenal value at $5.
If the ceiling of your entertainment budget is very low, then Norse Code is for you, and it's a great deal at $5 for an entire lifetime, countless hours, hopefully, of Norse Code over many seasons. And before we disengage from this little promotional opportunity, I wanted to thank our newest associate producer, Ryan Mock, for contributing on behalf of himself and a handful of other Norse Code listeners. So thank you, Ryan. We really appreciate your contribution. And if any of our other listeners feel like doing their fiduciary duty, then they can just go to our website at norsecodepodcast.com, scroll all the way to the bottom and click on the little PayPal donate button. You can donate with your PayPal account or any major credit or debit card and feel good that you supported the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which, just in case you're wondering, is still Norse Code.
Our formula's batting 1,000, so.
Well, Christian Ponder still sucks.
Yep. Although, side note to Christian Ponder sucking, you did do more good deeds recently. Have you heard about this? They bought clothing for a family recently, and then they gave that family an invite to Winter Park. So they gave them like a tour of like the Vikings area. The Robbins family like lost their wife, and so the Ponders.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and so the Ponders like bought them a bunch of like clothes and stuff. They I guess they didn't publicize it for a while, so it's one of those things. It's kind of cool. But he's still not good at football.
No, I wonder if he wouldn't be a better like public affairs guy.
He's very charismatic, especially when he can not have to walk the line, because whenever he's like loose and he doesn't have to like worry about upsetting Vikings PR, he's like pretty funny and like reasonably charismatic. But then he has to be like tight-lipped about theoretically being in a quarterback competition that he's clearly not in, and stuff like that.
So if he could just get a chance to let his hair down a little bit, maybe just represent the organization in a non-player capacity, maybe he'd be happier, more successful.
But he doesn't want to do that. He's gonna probably start for some team somewhere for like a couple of games.
Ugh.
Yeah, well, things happen. I mean, look at Mark Sanchez.
Oh my goodness, Mark Sanchez happened this week. That sure was something.
It was something else. The thing is, there's like 2 or 3 things about that. And we don't like to talk about other teams all that much, but I want to mention this real quickly. So the reaction I saw on Twitter was mostly like one or the other, right? Which is, I knew Mark Sanchez was good and the Jets were ruining him, and he's actually very good, and look at what's happening. He's a real coach, which, by the way, his quarterback coach is Bill Musgrave, so like calm down. And it's like, oh, Marshawn Lynch is really good. And then the other reaction was, look at how much the Carolina Panthers secondary sucks. Oh, it's been terrible for so long. This year, and it's just bad. It's putting these passes in. The Eagles system is so friendly to quarterbacks, and look, receivers are open, and etc. And the thing is, the problem is that like both sides had a point, right? Which is why it's like the real world has like shades of gray or something. And it was like really, really upsetting to see sort of all of these different takes, because the truth of the matter was that Mark Sanchez was showing skills that he hadn't at when he was with the New York Jets. In particular, his pocket presence was phenomenal. His ability to sort of manipulate the pocket and avoid the rush and find open passing lanes, all of that was very good. Much improved. His pocket presence and pocket awareness was extraordinary. But it is also true that receivers are running open all the time, like way open, not like kind of open or NFL open, right? Which is when they always talk about the college transition to the NFL, and we talk about players being college open versus NFL open. I mean, these players were college open against the Panthers. And it probably should be mentioned that I guess I haven't actually looked at the stat in detail because, again, not that big a deal to me. But he is actually thrown for the worst QBR, ESPN QBR, against the Panthers out of any quarterback this year so far. So it's not as if, look at him go. And then sort of the final thing you want to say is, well, remember how good Foles was last year. Remember how terrible he's been this year. He could get Wally pipped by Mark Sanchez, which that's pretty bad. So Mark Sanchez is better, but that doesn't mean he's good, I think is so far the takeaway.
Yeah, that seems fair. And I mean, I think you could argue that the Eagles can make, and maybe you just did, the Eagles can make a lot of players look better than, they probably are in a vacuum.
Right. So the Eagles are very confident in this fact too, right? Which is why they got rid of Deshaun Jackson, or rather why they were able to get rid of Deshaun Jackson. It was pretty clear that they wanted to get rid of him for a little while. And there's actually a couple of reasons for that are not related to the absolute smearing he took from NJ.com in terms of like these ridiculous arguments about his gang ties. But there was a bunch of actual reasons to get rid of him. And they replaced him functionally with Jeremy Maclin, who doesn't even like play the same role, but he's producing a lot of yards.
We've been talking a lot about how, well, some of us in the mailbag and me have talked about how key playing the Bears twice is to the Vikings having a successful season in terms of win-loss.
Right. Playing the Bears twice is very good for that.
You'd think so, but I read an article on Bleacher Report today. Well, maybe not so much an article as a blurb, but the nugget I gleaned from this blurb was that the Vikings are 1-12 in their last 13 appearances at Soldier Field.
Right, but that was against the previous Bears. This is this Bears.
That's true, and those were, and we ran up those that impressive string of losses with different Vikings, mostly different Vikings.
Mostly different Vikings. I mean, this is one of my favorite stats about the Vikings this year. Is that I don't even know why it's one of my favorites. this is true because it's such an enormous change. 7 of the starters for the Vikings on defense this year are different than last year. Out of 11, that's enormous. Teams don't have that kind of turnover, but the Vikings did, and it's turned out.
And it's worked out, quite well.
Yeah, and this is despite the fact that LaTroy Guion is not embarrassing himself anymore for the Packers. He was during the preseason in his limited time there and early on in the regular season. Then he had this like spate of games that were really good, and we got a bunch of confused Packers fans DMing me, and then he's been average since then, which is loads better than he was for the Vikings. So despite the fact that they lost, linchpin to the defense LaTroy Guion, and sack king Jared Allen, they've been better than they have been in a long time. Better than probably that 2009 team, actually.
The Bears are not good this season.
It's not good is an excellent way to describe them.
I tried to warn you about Mark Trestman. He's not a good coach. As much as I love Jay Cutler is not a good quarterback. Rich Gannon is a former NFL quarterback, obviously. He currently makes his bones as a commentator for CBS, and he'll be calling the Vikings-Bears game. So Gannon was on CBS Sports Network's NFL Monday QB and had a pretty quality quote about Jay Cutler and the Bears in general. He says, "This is a team that wasn't ready to play. They lost the last 4 out of 5, and they're coming off a bye. They came out, last night, and they were flat. Jay Cutler was awful. He turned it over 3 times, 2 interceptions and a fumble in the pocket. It bothered me that they weren't ready to play, and if I were Mark Trestman, I would sit Jay Cutler."
For Jimmy Clausen?
Apparently, yes. There is an unscientific poll on the Chicago Tribune website. Should the Bears bench quarterback Jay Cutler? 3,300 total votes. 75% say yes. Note that this poll does not indicate who the replacement would be. It is entirely possible that
that's like an ethereal.
Do not know or care who would replace him. They just want to punish Jay Cutler for being such an abject failure.
Cool.
I think that's
just like very. It's like driven by a set of principles instead of like this is the best available decision. Like it's just like, well, he deserves to be punished for how bad he's been instead of this would improve our team.
Well, it's driven by a kind of like this weird narrative about Jay Cutler, and there's a great article on Yahoo Sports where they have a dozen or so quotes from people on Twitter who were Bears fans that were tricked by this Onion article where the headline was, "Jay Cutler, I'll be the first person to admit we need a new punter."
So first, it's a fabulous Onion bit. So my favorite part of this is that the story is that you linked me about them getting tricked by the Onion. Most of them, since the story has been published, most of them have still not deleted those tweets that have indicated that, that they believe that Jay Cutler actually said these things. Bears fans just don't care, which is an interesting aside about, why we need to hate Jay Cutler. They just hate Jay Cutler, who himself does not care.
It has nothing to do with, amassing a good enough record to make the playoffs or to, build a, Super Bowl caliber team for next year. It is just 100% pure F.U. Jay Cutler.
I can understand that. I mean,
if there's anyone who could inspire that emotion in the NFL, I think Jay Cutler is right up there.
Well, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. So Jay Cutler, clearly sort of a better quarterback than Christian Ponder, right? Obviously. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, is that people are always angrier at Jay Cutler than they are at Christian Ponder, who has put in, some absolute clunkers. I don't think Jay Cutler has produced anywhere near as bad of a performance as Ponder had in 2012 when they went to the playoffs, right? When they went to the playoffs, Ponder 2012 still had especially that Arizona game, but it didn't matter, right? People just aren't angry at Ponder, right? So I remember when I was I've given up on Ponder. It was actually, I think it was 8 games into the season. No, not 8 games. It was more like 12 games into the season. I was like, all right, so we are in our second season of starting Ponder, and I'm done. I'm done with Ponder. and and this was actually right before the 4-game winning streak to take the Vikings into the playoffs. So it was an absolutely perfectly timed article. Christian Ponder sucks, and then he has a bad performance against the Bears that they win. He has a better performance against the Rams, and then a pretty decent performance against the Texans, and then one of his best performances of all time against the Packers. And they make it to the playoffs without him, of course. And I was like, yeah, so I'm glad I wrote that. But like, I was like, so I guess Joe Webb, like, because my guess is that Jimmy Clausen is better than Joe Webb, because Derek Anderson is better than Joe Webb because he is the backup to Cam Newton, and he plays instead of Cam Newton when Cam Newton is injured or whenever, right? And Joe Webb is just being turned into a receiver again quietly, like no one has noticed this. But like he's being turned into a receiver again, even though he's listed as a quarterback for them, because I guess he just can't be a quarterback for them. And so if Derek Anderson is a better quarterback than Joe Webb, then Jimmy Clausen is probably a better quarterback than Joe Webb. And I was like, maybe Joe Webb, right? But Bears fans are just like, I don't really, who cares? It could be Jimmy Clausen. It could be David Fales. Bring back Devin Hester. Can he throw? Let's just see if
that. Hello.
Hi.
So to me, I think part of it is an expectations game. Like, I mean, Christian Ponder is still on the Vikings, such as it is. And I mean, he's a harmless joke now. Like, our formula is this: Christian Ponder sucks, and we smack our foreheads whenever he gets stuck starting in a game. But after
gets stuck, what am I doing here?
After oh no, this is never part of the plan. But yeah, it's just like it's a big joke. We never really had that high of expectations for him. But Jay Cutler, he was 11th overall pick, and he was supposed to be the guy in Denver, and he did show flashes of brilliance. Early in his career, he's really strong. He's a really strong arm, made the Pro Bowl, and he was supposed to be like the linchpin to Denver, kind of lifting itself out of obscurity. Josh McDaniels came and ruined that.
Mm-hmm.
And Chicago thought they got a great deal on a Pro Bowl quarterback.
I thought Chicago got a great deal on it because it was the first time ever since 1940 that Chicago had a quarterback. So
exactly. And then they get Brandon Marshall, and they were supposed to have the pieces in place, right? They were supposed to have a dynamic offense, and they were gonna become a high scoring offensive team. None of that really has materialized. And
but think about it though, because in 2010 they go 10-6, they make the playoffs, right? And then they make it, and then they win, because I think they got a bye in the first round. And then win their next game, and then they play in the NFC Championship game against the Packers. Jay Cutler gets injured, and that's where it sort of all starts, right? Because he gets injured, but he walks off the field. And so people perceive that as he just doesn't want to play, even though we find out later that he actually tried to get back on the field and he couldn't because he had a grade 2 tear, which people just didn't cognize. They were just like, what a wimp. So
that happened after we found out all that stuff out in the off season, and so it was no longer interesting.
Right. Exactly. And so he gets injured, and then his backup comes in, and his backup plays so awful that they use the third quarterback rule, which means that they cannot go back, right? If they play the third quarterback, that person has to play unless he gets injured. And so they're like, no, we're going to close our door to other options. This guy is so bad for throwing in a third quarterback. And so they lose the game. The Packers win the Super Bowl. So screw you. Bears, but I would much rather that the Bears had won that Super Bowl. But different Vikings fans have different feelings for the different divisional rivals. But
Jay Cutler could go either way on it.
Right, Jay Cutler doesn't. Yeah.
He doesn't care about earthly pleasures.
But it's weird because that year he was sacked more often than any other quarterback, despite playing one fewer game. Right, he got sacked 52 times. Who knows what would have happened if he played in that 16th game in the regular season, right? For 352 yards, more yards than anyone else was sacked for in that season. And so everyone's like, oh, we just need an offensive line. And then Jay Cutler will be great. And he did play better in 2011 for the 10 games that he played. He only threw 7 interceptions, but only, 13 touchdowns. And so everyone was like really upset, and he starts yelling at teammates that screw up, which in fairness, that was a lot of them.
And he was really tired of getting sacked. I mean, it was getting out of control.
Yeah, well, and like compared to sort of other quarterbacks who interact with their offensive linemen, he was actually pretty restrained until I think it was like then there was like the story about like him yelling at Jamarcus Webb, which I don't know anyone who wouldn't have wanted to yell at Jamarcus Webb, but given Cutler's like sort of general temperament and sort of all of the buildup of all of the stories about Cutler and who he is and sort of his personality and stuff like that. That didn't help, and then 2012 they didn't make the playoffs, even though they went 10-6, and they fired Lovie Smith for some reason. I didn't actually understand that. And then they bring in Trestman, and Josh McCown puts up better statistics than Jay Cutler, although I believe Cutler probably played better than McCown. McCown had some of the best statistics in the NFL, alongside, of course, Nick Foles, who, as we both know, both of them are having stellar seasons this year. But yeah, and so when the backup plays better and he keeps on, he hasn't played a 16-game season since 2009. I get that they're like just upset with him because they had such high expectations. They went to the NFC Championship game, and then we just hear story after story after story after story after story about how he is like terrible as a person.
It just hasn't worked out, and he always looks weird in pictures, and for some reason he's got like a really hot wife. There's a lot of
right.
There's a lot of things to dislike about Jay Cutler on face. I mean, like I said, I love Jay Cutler. I think he is more zen than almost any NFL quarterback. Like, he has managed to transcend the material world, I think, more than almost any player in the NFL.
So you think his apathy is not nihilism, but rather enlightenment?
Exactly. It is. You may not be able to tell because he never smiles. Like, he doesn't have that. I mean, I've never been in his physical presence, and it may not really manifest itself on TV very well. But I suspect he has more the kind of comfortable, enlightening presence of the Buddha than the kind of standoffish, introverted persona of a nihilist.
That's an interesting take. I would.
So if there's anybody that has stood next to Jay Cutler and can report on his aura, please email us at norseCodepodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at Norse Code-branded on Twitter.
So for me, Jay Cutler is mostly amusing, but if I had to pick between, admiration or disgust, if I put away the fact that he plays for the Bears, right? If I don't care about the team that he plays for, I would have to say I would absolutely admire him, not for I guess his approach towards Nirvana has so much as this is an insanely tough dude, tougher than Tony Romo, who also has taken a lot of sort of physical and verbal abuse, but an insanely tough dude who has diabetes. Has anyone like mentioned it? He has diabetes. He's playing in the NFL at a really like relatively high level. He's played in the NFL at a really high level. He's taken a ton of hits. He takes more hits than almost anyone else, right?
Type 1 diabetes. He's had it since he was pretty young. He was like in his late teens, early 20s when he first started being treated for it or something. And he started a foundation to, combat type 1 diabetes. And he is crazy strong. He lifts weights like, what's his name? The ginger, like Andy Dalton style.
What's his name?
The big ginger guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jay Cutler currently. So this is something I find like super interesting. So if you use traditional statistics, Cutler's having the best year of his life. He has the highest passer rating he's ever had. Right. He's had more yards per game, which again, traditional statistics. So I understand like what your hesitancy with that would be than he ever has had. He's throwing at a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which despite how I don't want to say mediocre because that doesn't sound mediocre. That's pretty decent. But despite how slightly better than average that sounds, I think it's the best he's ever had, right? It's really the only issue with him, as it always is with Chicago, is sack avoidance. Because in terms of adjusted yards per attempt, he's having not a career year, but a near career year. He's I mean, he's playing pretty well. The timing of his plays, of his bad plays, are bad, right? When he makes bad plays, they are pretty bad. But he's at a higher touchdown rate than he's ever had in his career, right? He's throwing touchdowns at a clip, much better than he ever has. And his interception rate is actually pretty average for him. It's actually below average for him. It's at 3% of his passes, but he just happens to throw them at poorish times. So, with all of that comes the fact that, screw him. So yeah, I absolutely respect him. He's playing better than he ever has by a lot of measures. He gets beat up more than almost any other quarterback on a consistent basis, physically by other teams and in the media and by fans. And he's just still doing, and he does all of this with type 1 diabetes.
And his Halloween costume game is on point.
Yes, it is. I totally forgot about that.
I think it's great that if you do a Google search for Jay Cutler, Jay Cutler workout is one of the top 6 suggested completions, and Jay Cutler Halloween is also up there, especially if you do an image search.
Well, so my favorite thing about his 80s Halloween costume is I believe he's smoking in it, like he's got a cigarette.
That's just the kind of perfect peaceful awareness that Jay Cutler has. He knows what he's here to do. He knows what his place in the universe is, and he's comfortable with it.
But he has I think he has one of the Smoking Jay Cutler shirts. He definitely.
Oh, of course he does. Right? Of course he does.
I think he has a Smoking Mike Ditka shirt. Like he's pretty aware.
He has the, I guess, freedom to be enlightened, self-actualized, as it were. I would feel pretty confident that my, base needs are being met, and I would be free to pursue a path to self-actualization if I had $54 million in guaranteed money.
But your path to self-actualization includes being drilled by 260-pound men in ways that are not good.
And not all at once either. Like, it's not just one instance. It is they get you pretty much individually, sometimes on the double team.
Yeah, you could get double teamed by 260-pound men. That's true.
Yeah, no, but I mean, self-actualization. Frankly, I just want to be able to pick a Halloween costume. I am glad that I don't really participate in Halloween because I never know what to be. And
it'd be pretty cool to figure out your Halloween costume if your life was like a meme, right? Like if people had memes about you, you could just dress up as the exaggerated version of yourself and be like, "Oh, I'm the Arif meme."
Do you think Sarah Palin did that a couple years ago?
But that requires a level of awareness that I don't think Sarah Palin has shown that she has. Like, and I don't even mean that as an insult. She's just not as attuned culturally to the mainstream as she is to a particular subculture, right? So
I think you're right. I think she's not meta enough,
right,
for that. Like she is too earnest,
right,
and that is an integral part of her public persona.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you think there's any possibility that Cutler gets traded away from the Bears if they don't make the playoffs in the next couple of years? They can save $16 million in guaranteed money if they let him go.
And draft a quarterback? I mean, they're not even the problem is that they're probably going to play themselves out of a good quarterback this year or next year. I don't know. I suppose if they traded Cutler at the end of this year, they could tank functionally and figure out if they're going to get a quarterback to compete with David Fales to be the eventual quarterback of the future. I don't know. I doubt it. I mean, Cutler. We can stop with the Cutler's underrated talk. We can stop with the fact that he's top 10 or whatever, because after the 2012 draft that was no longer true, right? Because of Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson. Andrew Luck is playing better than ever. Russell Wilson is struggling more than he ever has. And a healthy Robert Griffin, whatever that means. And then this last draft was produced in a couple of young signal callers that might be interesting too. The influx of new quarterbacks will make it difficult for Jay Cutler to call himself a top 10 quarterback. But after seeing the contracts that Andy Dalton and Colin Kaepernick got, you have to sort of think, well, he's worth having on the team. And if you're going to have him on the team, he's starting for you. You can win with him so long as you don't have Mel Tucker coordinating your defense. I think
a fair statement.
Yeah, Jay Cutler, just like Tony Romo, actually, is capable of winning a Super Bowl so long as he's not the sole reason you are getting to the Super Bowl, right? Like I think that's true. Either they've been having bad years, or they've been having unlucky years. So Cutler being injured in 2013 meant that he couldn't participate in that weird Chicago offensive run, but also because their defense. 2014, it's because of the defense. 2012 was just a bit of luck in terms of problems because they probably should have made the playoffs at 10-6. 2011, it was the injury. It's the reason Chicago kept on bringing in backup quarterbacks. So, 2010, they almost made it to the Super Bowl before he got injured. So I think Cutler has the ability to win a Super Bowl. You just can't be the sole reason that you're buying for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, that seems fair. And I mean, there's got to be some kind of monetary value to the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you were like, what are they going to do? Draft a quarterback?
Right. So there you
go. Jay Cutler will not get a whole lot of help from other starters on his offense this week, it sounds like. As of Wednesday, Brandon Marshall, Josh Morgan, Martellus Bennett not participating in practice.
So are they just not expected to play, or are they just are they probable, doubtful? What's the word?
Looks like Morgan and Bennett are expected to play, or at least they are not on the Pro Football Reference injuries list.
Both Bennett and Marshall are listed by ESPN Fantasy as questionable. I would still actually expect both to play.
Okay, so maybe they'll be. It actually kind of sounds like they'll be in the game after all. That bodes ill for Minnesota, despite better performance from Josh Robinson as of late.
Well, I mean, the issue, of course, is that, the reason that Chicago is supposed to be quarterback friendly, and the reason that, Trustman can design, a quote unquote system that enables players like Josh McCown to just, do the thing, is they've got 3 receivers, I guess 2 now, because I think Marquez Wilson's out for the year, but they've got receivers that are above 6'4", both Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall are 6'4", 6'5". Martellus Bennett is 6'5", right? And they both have long arms too to go with their already very tall frames, and so it creates matchup problems. Josh Robinson is a good example. Xavier Rhodes much less of an example because he's 6'2". He also has very, very long arms. So it creates matchup problems, but I figure the safeties are sort of designed to help resolve that problem. I don't know. Martellus Bennett he's pretty good. He's a much better fantasy player than he is like a football player. Which is to say that he racks up all these statistics, but that doesn't mean that he is necessarily an intended threat going forward relative to sort of the other receivers on the team. I think that there are some issues with sort of the way the Vikings defense matches up with the offense, but I'm not that worried about it just because I think there are some problems with the right side of the offensive line for the Bears that the Vikings can exploit, especially with players like Anthony Barr. Brian Robinson's in a bit of a slump in terms of his pass rush ability. I don't know if that's because he's being asked to play contain a lot more, but it's not preventing Everson Griffin from getting sacked. So, who knows? They might have to keep a tight end in a little bit more often than they're used to. So they might not have 5 eligible receivers. They might have 3, right? Because Matt Forte is going to pass block or be an outlet option. Who knows? So I think the key to sort of winning this game is probably to play a little bit more cover 2 than they're used to. And doing that provides safety help, and then just sort of trust the front 7 to take care of the run game, and put pressure on the quarterback, in a variety of different ways. And I think that'll probably resolve, a lot of these matchup problems without having to worry too much about giving up too much.
So do you think that we will be effective in getting to Jay Cutler? I mean, it seems like that's not the hardest thing in the world to do. Or do you think that we will have more success just, peeling off Matt Forte and a tight end or 2 from the offensive set by making them defend against our our pass rush.
I think in terms of getting to Jay Cutler, I think sort of the best way to do that is to overload them a little bit, not necessarily just to win with the front four, because the Chicago offensive line, sort of on balance, is not holistically bad. It's just been sort of bad in the past couple of weeks, especially sort of on the right side of the line. But I mean, you take a look at players like Kyle Long and Jordan Mills, and you see that sort of they've had like pretty good games outside of this. Michael Ola, who switched sides a couple of times, has had some issues too. I would argue sort of overloading the protection schemes with creative blitzes and stuff like that would be a better way to do it. Figuring out where Michael Ola is and attacking him would be good if he's playing. Attacking Jordan Mills would be good, and those are sort of Ola has played both guard and tackle over the past couple of games. Kyle Long has been up and down in his pass protection this year. Jordan Mills has been pretty bad. In fact, I think off the top of my head, I think he's been sort of, there have been like 4 or 5 tackles that have been consistently bad this year. Matt Khalil, Jake Matthews, Chantrell Henderson. I think Jordan Mills is one of them too. So attacking him wherever he lines up, almost always right tackle, would probably be the best idea. And that would sometimes mean putting additional people into the pass rush, which would then force players like Martellus Bennett to stay in, force Matt Forte to stay in for 6 and 7 man protections. If the Bears instead choose the Packers approach of spreading out to protect Jay Cutler, which makes sense given Mark Trestman's background, that could cause some problems because the Packers have found that they actually protect themselves better by sending more receivers into play on short outlet passes because it prevents Rodgers from getting hit. Because protection, you always have to worry about the possibility of a breakdown, either in communication or technique, and someone can get past your guy. But if you send all 5 receivers and they send 7 people, you're going to have 2 of those receivers open, and you can just hit them right away. So that's like that. It depends sort of how the Bears resolve this problem at right tackle and right guard and potentially left guard, depending on sort of what's happening with the way they're moving people around. I think the question of whether or not they can get to Jay Cutler before he has the ability to get rid of the ball is a good one, but it's not necessary because I think Jay Cutler under pressure this year just hasn't, because they don't have to hit Jay Cutler necessarily to cause bad outcomes for him. I think under pressure this year, he's had some more issues. He used to be very, very good at throwing on the run and reacting to pressure and finding open passing lanes and all that. This year, I would argue he's not as good under pressure. He's thrown a couple of should-be interceptions, if you will. But, like sort of on the other hand, when they're not interceptions, they're almost always caught. Like he doesn't throw as many incompletions under pressure as a lot of other quarterbacks. So you sort of have to, pick your poison with him. But I think for the most part, sending 6 or 7 is probably the best approach to deal with the matchup problem in the backfield or in the secondary.
My suspicion, and I hate to hang our hats on this, but the last 2 wins, the game has looked like it was about to slip out of our hands, and then we picked the ball off at a crucial time and kind of turned the momentum in our favor. Ignoring for a moment that narrative employs basically all the tropes that we hate and makes no analytical sense. I think that this game represents an opportunity to have that happen again. Like if that's gonna be our formula for this season, then this game represents an excellent chance for us to execute on it.
I think the idea of the Vikings performing under pressure is just concurrent with the fact that they're a better second half team. So, yes and no. Yeah, they perform better under pressure, but it's not because of pressure. Which also would feed a momentum argument. Yeah, they play well with momentum and they have momentum, but it's just because they've showed up in the second half of games. Those also happen to be high leverage situations, so it seems like they've got more momentum. I would argue that the Vikings defense just happens to be very good, and this is a good game for us to test that out because the Bears offense, though it hasn't been performing well, I think matches up well against the Vikings defense in a number of ways. It just so happens that they've got a pretty decent tight end that has the ability to challenge the linebackers in coverage. They've got these height advantages. They've got a fantastic receiver core. So Analytically, of course, I disagree with you, but there's a lot of reasons to think that that's true, and a lot of those reasons may not play themselves out this next game.
Well, let's hope they do. On the other side of the ball, Kyle Rudolph still hopes to play in this game. If he does it matter?
Yes, because the Bears' corner situation is better. So this is tough because the Bears' defense is, right? Like it's bad. It's like almost as bad as the Tampa Bay defense. It's one of the worst in the NFL. I think the from a talent perspective, Tim Jennings and Kyle Fuller are better cornerbacks, obviously in coverage, than from a talent perspective the Bears linebackers. And so I would not be surprised to see a bunch of 12 sets with 2 tight ends and 2 receivers, so that you can have 2 tight ends out on the field, Chase Ford and Kyle Rudolph, who have the ability to threaten the Bears, who are playing Shea McClellan at linebacker, which I think is a mistake. DJ Williams at linebacker, who's not that great, and Lance Briggs, who used to be good but is no longer that good. And in coverage, I think the Bears are pretty weak. I think just in the middle of the field in general, their safeties are not very good. Chris Conte, after a stellar beginning of the season, is still actually not a good safety, it turns out. Like, shock, right? But whoever you have matching up against the tight ends, I think is a mismatch for the Vikings. And that's a good thing. And also, like, it's always good to give a young quarterback big targets, I think, just in general. I don't think necessarily big targets, quote unquote, help their development, but it helps you win games with them. So that's good. I think it's good to win games with young quarterbacks, and I think that Kyle Rudolph can help do that. Which is not to say I think that he's as good of a tight end as Vikings fans have sort of billed him to be. But if it is the case that he is a better route runner now than before, and that he's dropped like 30 pounds to do it, which is to say he's 250 pounds, because the Vikings used to have him at 280, which is nuts. That's insane. Then I think maybe he can turn out to be a better tight end than he was before, which would mean he's a better tight end than I thought he was, which would be good for a number of reasons.
Jared Allen.
Matt Khalil.
That's illuminating. Really though? Like,
I think that he might end up with a sack. I think that for the most part, he's not going to get a ton of pressure on the quarterback, despite Matt Khalil's play. Matt Khalil was actually very frank, I think, today in media. Actually, and so was Jared Allen, right? Because that's who he is. He actually had a bunch of great quotes and interviews for the press that I really enjoyed today.
My favorite wasn't even from the interview, but when Jared Allen himself called the media conference line, yes. Just like, get me someone from the media. Let's do this interview. He's his own secretary. That's just the kind of man Jared Allen is.
It is. I love him. Reading all of those reminded me why I love him so much. But yeah, he's been like, yeah, I've been sucking, and I have 1.5 sacks, and I think that's a pretty good definition of sucking. He's pretty frank about it. Matt Khalil was also pretty frank about his issues. He doesn't think he has a confidence issue. He thinks he has a technique issue. I think that is more likely the case because of some of the issues that he's had. But I'm also worried about like the way that he punches into defensive linemen and stuff like that. If Matt Khalil has recognized what the problem is, because he's been talking about the way that he's been experimenting with technique, if he recognizes what the problem is, I think Jared Allen's going to have a very bad day. But I think there's still a bunch of stuff for him to work out. So we'll see. I think maybe there's a small chance that Matt Khalil has started trusting himself more than he starts trusting his offensive line coach, which, though Jeff Davidson's been very good, I think this year he's a big part of the reason the offensive line is failing. And if it is such that Matt Khalil has figured out what works for him and it just doesn't happen to fit what Jeff Davidson is teaching, I think that's okay. I think if he just figures out what works for him, I think we're going to be sort of in a fine spot. I don't think Jared Allen's going to be that big of a threat.
Chicago, according to Pro Football Reference, ranks 32nd among NFL teams in points scored by defense.
Yeah, that's a pretty fluky stat, though.
That's not that you don't think that portends anything for this game, that we can take any comfort in that we are unlikely to give up points to their defense.
I suppose it's not like there's like a 0-to-0 correlation between first half, second half in that stat or anything like that. There's a pretty low correlation. Instead, I would say I would take more comfort in the fact that this defense, although technically better than advertised, it's not the worst defense in the league. It's not as bad as Jacksonville or Tampa Bay. We take comfort in the fact that it's just a bad defense. Like it does. I'm not worried about them scoring pick sixes, not because they haven't had pick sixes or fumble returns for touchdowns, but because they'd have to pick the ball first, and I don't think they're
just not going to do that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about a couple of guys, but I think I'll let our listeners do that in the mailbag.
Sure. I think in terms of attacking the Chicago Bears defense, one thing I noticed from watching sort of the All-22, the Packers game against Chicago, and the previous game, I think, against New England, that the Bears played. So the Bears are a multiple coverage team. They mix coverages. They play different kinds of coverages against different receivers. So, for example, against Randall Cobb, they play him with inside leverage to force him outside. Against Jordy Nelson, they play him with outside leverage to force him inside. They play a lot of cover one in that game. They've played a lot of cover two recently as well. The biggest problem for the Bears, I think, is the lack of communication between the safeties and the quarterbacks. And I think if you design plays that exploit that issue, corner routes paired with seam routes, that sort of thing, I think the Vikings offense will be in a good spot, especially because if Teddy's deep ball is as good as Mike Zimmer says it is, which is unlikely to be true, but still, if that is the case, then this is a good Bears team to attack in that way. The second thing I want to say is probably the middle of the field will be the easiest to attack. It doesn't even have to be deep. I think the 10 to 15 yard area in the middle of the field will be the easiest to attack, just because if you can confuse the safeties, you're in a good spot.
And that goes directly back to that Vine you posted on Twitter just a few minutes ago, how easy it was for the Packers to induce safety to make a mistake. Right,
because the safety in that case, Ryan Mundy, was trying to stay on top of the slot receiver, who I believe was Randall Cobb, and he should have just let Demontre Hurst carry underneath him while Chris Conte rolled on top of him, which is what he was doing, because Rodgers is getting flushed out of the pocket, so you have to roll the zone to the right. Ryan Mundy never did that. Chris Conte did, and he was correct to do that. The CB just lost him. I mean, it is zone coverage, so it's not like he has to follow him all the way back. And the safety has to pick him up, even though you've got this other player who's trying to attack the deep seam on a post pattern. It's just when you force the safety to make a decision, you're probably in a good place.
You're probably doing something right. You probably set yourself up favorably.
Yeah, especially against Chicago.
Yeah. So looking at Vegas Insider, of course, my source for everything I know about football and scoring. Chicago, by consensus, is a 3-point favorite at home. Over-under is 46.5, which means Vegas thinks the game will be about 25-22 in Chicago's favor.
Mm-hmm.
By my very complicated mathematical process of induction.
Right.
I don't know. I can see this game. I can see Teddy Bridgewater throwing for like 2 touchdowns and the offense getting going, but then, stalling out on a few drives just because that's, what we do. But we could probably still move down the field pretty well. So I think we could score 2 or 3 field goals. So that'd be 23 points. And I suspect our defense will be pretty successful breaking up Jay Cutler and his receiver core. But not completely successful. I imagine I feel like they could go for a touchdown or two and probably kick a field goal. So we'll say 23-17 Vikings. Take the under.
Sure, I think that makes sense. So there's a distinction between the sharps and sort of the general people who are picking. If you take a look at pickwatch.com, which does a really good job of sort of aggregating, pundit and expert picks. One second, pickwatch.com is not loading.
Well, why not?
Excellent. It gives Chicago, so 64% of people picking are picking Chicago, which I think sort of when we get more people like from Pro Football Focus, Fox Sports, especially ESPN, when we get the ESPN personalities picks in, we'll see more Vikings picks. The general understanding seems to be driven by recency bias. Because Chicago's had, pretty bad defense these past 3 games, but against really good teams. I think the Sharps are splitting the difference and saying they're equal teams, and they're giving Chicago home field advantage because they're working a little bit more off of models. The models indicate in the aggregate sort of that the Vikings, aren't as good as they have been in the past 4 weeks. Chicago isn't as bad as they have been in the past 3 weeks. And so that's what they're going with. So the question is, should we trust these teams to play more like they have over the past 3 weeks, or should we trust these teams to play like they have over the year? And in general, it's better to pick the larger sample regardless of like recency weighting. So for example, Football Outsiders found that if you recency weight their DVOA measures, it does not improve pick accuracy, and in fact is almost identical in pick accuracy as aggregate DVOA is. And so is the Vikings defense as good as it has been over the past 3 weeks? If it is, Chicago, I don't think stands a chance. If the Chicago, defense is as bad as it has been in the past 3 weeks, they definitely don't stand a chance. I think that there is some level of recency weighting we can do here for a couple of reasons. I think the first reason is because, in terms of installing a new scheme, the Vikings defense has been a little bit confused, which is why those first couple of drives always go bad for them. We haven't had an opening drive go bad for the Vikings defense in a little bit now. Captain Munnerlyn, in particular, has been playing very well over the past couple of weeks because he no longer looks confused in coverage. And in fact, I think I predicted on the show, if not on the show, then at least in one of my mailbags, that Captain Munnerlyn would improve just by staying on the field, because his issues have not been technique. They have not been, speed. They've not been athletic in any way. They've not been technical in any way. They've been because of, coverage confusion and confusion on who does what and what calls. And that's the sort of thing that gets resolved over the course of the year. I think Robert Blanton has improved because his instincts have improved. I have some issues with sort of, a little bit of how he plays, but he's improved in ways that I think are sustainable. I do not know if Sharif Floyd's improvement is sustainable. I do not know if Everson Griffin's improvement has been sustainable, but I think Anthony Barr's is. And I think with all of that combined, I think the Vikings defense is better than it was at the beginning of the year. And therefore, I think that it is more likely that the Sharps are probably wrong than right to consider these teams to be as good as their aggregate instead of as good as sort of what they've been recently. So I would also argue that the Vikings are favored, but I wouldn't say it's 23-17, but instead say it's closer to 20-17.
You think we'll have one more drive sputter out a little early?
Yeah, I mean, if we only had second half Teddy Bridgewater, I think that this would be a clear win for the Vikings. But so long as he continues to show that he needs time to get on rhythm, that's time in games that we're wasting by losing. So we need to continue to catch up.
That's fair. By way of recency, I think the conversation about the Bears that we would be having would be a little different if the last 3 weeks had played out differently. I mean, they had the bye week, and then on either end of the bye were two very disappointing losses that prove that Chicago is not a Super Bowl contender for this season, at least.
Yeah.
I think the Packers and Patriots beat the Bears by a combined score of 106-37. Which is pretty bad. However, the Vikings have also played the Patriots and the Packers away this season, and the Vikings lost by a combined score of 72-17.
Is that bad?
It's not good. It's good that we were able to hold those two high-powered offenses to fewer points than the Bears did. However, the win gap was larger. I mean, and you can't. They're not exact apples to apples comparisons, but the Bears are probably better than we think they are, given the last 3 weeks, and the Vikings, I suspect, are probably about as good, if maybe slightly better than we've seen the last few weeks. And the question is, which team will be able to play better? Which team will be able to outplay their mediocre expectations for this week? And I'm hoping it's the Vikings, but my suspicion is that the Bears might be a slightly better and more balanced team. So that is the asterisk on my score prediction.
All right, then.
Number of the week this week, picking on old Jay Cutler again. Number of the week is 6.
So it's 6, and it's related to Jay Cutler. Is that the number of years left on his contract?
No, that'd be funny if it were. It's his quarterback rating from the Green Bay game.
Jesus.
6. League average is 50 by design. And Jay Cutler put up a 6.
Man, total QBR is not happy.
No. Against Miami, he put up a 19.3.
Man, I hate total QBR. We've been over this.
If you want to set up a curious narrative, total QBR is there for it. He put up a 47.6 against New England. A lot of good it did him.
His total QBR for the season, according to ESPN, is 57.4, which means he must have had something in him in those early games. It's probably clutch.
Yeah, he put up an 80.8 in the win over San Francisco, which seems just crazy to think about now. Or losing to Carolina. Like, what was that about?
Beat the Jets to the 72.4. So I guess QBR is not like opponent adjusted, right?
If it is, they probably use a really small multiplier.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I mean, so he put up some really good QBRs against terrible secondaries. So against Atlanta, against Carolina, against New York, his QBRs are above 70. But against Miami, who have an absolutely underrated defense, he put up a 19.3. Like you mentioned, he put up a 6 against Green Bay. And I mean, he put in a below average performance against New England, who secondary is better person for person than I think it is on the field. I think it's less than the sum of its parts, but Belichick will figure it out, so it doesn't really matter. He averaged 10 yards a pass against Atlanta.
He did. That was quite the game. I think that was the game when everybody kind of agreed that Atlanta was not good.
It sucks because it would have meant more for Teddy's performance. It's not like college football where like your strength of schedule is taken into account in your final rankings or anything like that. But like, would have been nice.
No, here it just reveals that the only teams that we've really beaten are pretty bad teams.
Buffalo is not. Wait, we lost to Buffalo. God damn
it! Exactly my point. Don't believe the hype.
I was like, well, no, Buffalo's not a bad team. Oh, also we haven't beaten them, so that doesn't count.
But yeah, no, this the little chart that I've got here, that we'll throw in the show notes. We just have been looking at all the Pro Football Reference total QBR numbers. They're kind enough to leave those conveniently out for us. But yeah, no, Jay Cutler puts up good numbers against terrible secondaries, much like Peyton Manning did last week against Oakland. You kind of got the impression he went into that game with a chip on his shoulder after being completely stymied by a New England defense that is good, but I mean, I don't think they were as good as they played. I think Bill Belichick just had Peyton Manning figured out. And I think Wes Welker might have taken a couple of dives. I think Bill Belichick might have reminded him who really butters his bread.
If you want a coaching job after you leave the league.
I think more like if you ever want to see your wife and kids again. But
well, that's what a coaching job is a metaphor for.
that's probably what the text message said, but Wes Welker's hands got all cold. No. Why? But yeah, so Peyton Manning came out and just obliterated the Oakland defense. And I would like to see him play with that same chip on his shoulder against terrible teams for the rest of the season. And with the exception of games against Kansas City and San Diego, who San Diego is not that great, I don't think. The Broncos have a pretty easy schedule. And so my wildly irresponsible prognostication for this week is going to be that the Denver Broncos win out the 2014-2015 season. They do not lose any more games in the regular season. Though they will lose one more game, probably.
But only not like one. Irresponsible. Like,
it's the way I framed it. It seems reasonable, right? But
yeah, they only have 7 games left.
Yeah, that winning 7 games in a row. They have 2 losses now.
Yeah, winning 7 games in a row is like hard, but it's significantly easier when you're the best team in the league.
Well, the Broncos are not at the top of any power rankings.
Because power rankings are terrible.
I don't know if that's more about power rankings than the team. Yes.
So I found this to be.
I am balancing this on the sheer difficulty of winning 7 games in a row.
I mean, okay. So remember when we were talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, and we were talking about how there's a possibility they can go 0-16. Yeah. Because they were playing like the worst football we had seen since 1976. And then they turned it around and
then they won like 4 games.
Yeah, 2 against the Texans. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing.
Yes, it is.
I mean, okay, so the Broncos have had 2 losses against the Seahawks and the Patriots. That's it, right? And they had a game against the Jets that was closer than the final score indicates. 31-17 was actually closer than that. So props to the Jets. They had a close-ish game against the Chiefs. They had a game that was more dominant than the score suggests against San Diego. They only ended up winning 35-21, but they were more than 14 points better. I still think it's not that irresponsible. Although I can run the numbers real quick and tell you exactly how irresponsible it is. You want me to do that?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's quantify my irresponsibility.
All right.
In a way that does not involve my monthly budget.
I've got a really nice forecast that forecasts records, playoff probabilities, etc. If you input your efficiency numbers, it comes preloaded with advanced football analytics efficiency numbers. So I will just use those because I have found those to be identically as accurate, although they pick different games than I do. So despite the fact that they disagree with me a lot in terms of which teams are good or which game or how games will go, they are identically as accurate as me in terms of picking against the spread. So I find that kind of funny. All right, forecast the remainder of the season. So it's doing that right now by running 100,000 simulations. Okay, it's done. Okay, it's decently irresponsible, but not as irresponsible as you'd guess. There's about a 7.5% chance that Denver wins out the rest of the season.
I was hoping for 10% or less.
Yeah. But to go 6-1 over the rest of the season, what do you think the chances of that are?
Uh, 30%.
Actually pretty close. 25%. It's 32% for to go 4-2 for the rest of the season, which is the most likely on this bell curve. Anyway, guess where Minnesota ends up. Total wins.
Total wins.
Yeah.
7.
Yep. It's a perfect. So most of these teams don't end up having a perfect-ish bell curve or anything like that. Minnesota
They end up with percentage. They end up with 7.2 wins or something.
Yeah. So Minnesota has a 32% chance of 7 wins. If you take a look sort of at the playoff seedings, Minnesota obviously doesn't make the playoffs, but their chances of making the postseason, which, as you can imagine, are not particularly great, stand at 2.7% using these numbers.
Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah, but I mean,
what do you expect?
Minnesota's shooting for 8-8, right? So
yeah,
25% chance of that. 24, but yeah.
Well, that's
not bad.
Yeah, given, I mean, it's not as optimistic as we were at the very beginning of the season, but it is certainly much better than I think we felt before the Buffalo game, which, even though that wasn't that great of a game, I mean, those were some dark times for the Vikings.
Yeah, some dark times. If we recency weighted these, I bet the Vikings win 8 games. But again, all of the caveats about recency weighting.
But if we recency weighted, it won't really make a difference. So why would we bother?
Well, you have to determine. So when Football Outsiders found out that recency weighting doesn't affect your ability to predict, for certain teams it did improve, and for an equal number of teams it did not improve.
For teams that were performing significantly below expectation, then recency weighting improved their. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you have a wildly irresponsible prognostication for this week?
So my initial wildly irresponsible prognostication is too irresponsible to count, which was that the Vikings would make the playoffs. But
yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
But the Vikings will be in the wild card discussion in week 14 and 15.
Like how in the discussion, like they'll be talking about how the Vikings still have an outside chance if, 2 teams lose and they win out.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Then that doesn't seem that irresponsible, really. I mean, I think the chances of that happening are significantly higher than 10%.
I don't know, because the Vikings winning even so what, they've got 7 games left and they're 4-5.
So we wouldn't be able to do it with 8-8 probably. We have to go at least 9-5, maybe even 10-6 to be part of that discussion. Right.
Well, in order to be in that discussion, week 15. So let's move it up to week 15.
Have to be like 8-5. Would that be the right number of games? 8-6.
Yeah, they'd have to be 8-6 to be in that discussion, right? Because then they'd have to win 2 more. Because all of the times the Vikings make the playoffs. Well, there is a possibility they can make the playoffs with 9 wins, but the Vikings win 9 games about 9% of the time, and then make the playoffs with 9 games about 1% of the time. So there's a 1 in 9 chance that once you win 9 games, you make the playoffs. So I think you pretty much have to just push them into you have to win 10 games thing. And so the Vikings would have to win 4 of their next 5 games in order to be in the discussion. So it is still irresponsible.
That's pretty difficult.
Yeah. I mean, remember, they have a losing record.
That's true. And the only reason we've won so many games is we've beaten some pretty lousy teams, basically the 3 of the worst teams in the league.
Yeah, right. And they're close games.
And so we would need to beat the Bears. We have to beat the Packers, the Panthers, the Jets, and the Lions. And some combination. We could only lose to one of those teams. We could conceivably beat the Panthers and the Jets, I guess, depending on. I don't know. Those are going to be tough games to call. And then we can lose to either the Lions or the Packers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty irresponsible.
Yeah.
I mean, we could still conceivably get to 8-8 and have your prognostication be true if we went 8-5 and then lost the last 2 games, but or last 3. But
it's tough. The Vikings have to win 4 of their next 5 to be in the discussion.
Yeah, and this is probably the most difficult part of our schedule, other than the very beginning. The Vikings had a tough schedule this year.
That's such a ridiculous thing to say. Yeah, so the first 5 games are the most difficult part of the schedule, but besides the first 5 games, the next 5 games in a 16-game season, the most difficult.
Well, the third 5 games. I mean, the second 5 games are pretty tough too. but it's really
Well, okay,
the first the middle 5 games are pretty weak.
yes, the middle 5 games are pretty weak.
I mean, we play 4 of the worst teams in the league and had a bye. I think we can argue that the middle 5 weeks of the season are.
So the Bears pretty easy game. Easy relative to the rest of the schedule. Packers game very tough. Panthers game surprisingly easy, I guess. Jets game easy. Lions game hard. Dolphins game harder than people think. Bears game easy. I don't think that's a tough schedule.
Yeah, I just don't know what to think about the Panthers game and the Jets game. I mean, it's recency bias, I guess. The Panthers look terrible, and the Jets suddenly have new life, I guess. I don't know.
I wouldn't say the Jets have new life.
That might be an overstatement.
Yeah, I mean, who's providing new life? Michael Vick. Case closed.
Touche. Should we mailbag? We got a handful of questions this week.
Sure.
Ethan Thomas, how luxurious will the bearskins we're wearing after this week be? Magnificent or merely ritzy?
I wouldn't ever characterize bearskins as ritzy, so I'm going to go with magnificent.
Do people wear bearskins? I thought bearskins were more of like a rug thing, and like fox and mink were more of the coat furs.
I'm thinking like sort of like barbarians from like Baldur's Gate, where you've got like the head as your hat. Sort of like how Hercules wore the Nemean lion, right? The head's your hat.
Okay. In that case, I think that would qualify as magnificent.
Yeah.
I don't think
but definitely not ritzy.
Yeah, that doesn't really strike fear into the hearts of your enemies, but wearing the taxidermied skull of a bear on your head is magnificent and terrifying by turns.
Correct. Also, that's like something like literal Vikings probably would do had they encountered bears. They were not really North American, despite their early discoveries of North America, so can't really say that. But, like, yeah, they would do
that. Nate Schatzel writes us with a few questions over the emails. What am I, my mom? Do you think the performance of this year's draft picks or the amount of guys taken off our practice squad by other teams is more indicative of our front office's good player evaluations?
No. When you have draft picks that are sniped by other teams after training camp, it is often an indication that your team's picks are relatively close to league consensus on those players. But because they don't evaluate the preseason and change their mind all that much. They're like, when we evaluated this guy in the draft, we liked him, so we picked him up. Like that's what happens. Their draft evaluation was of a person that they liked, and the Vikings happened to pick them earlier. The performance of our team's picks this year does indicate good things about the Vikings' drafting capabilities. But then you have to take into account, what about 3rd-round pick Scott Crichton? What about much ballyhooed 5th-round pick? And yeah, we're talking about a 5th-round pick. But much ballyhooed 5th-round pick David Yankee. Why is he beating Vlad Dukas / Charlie Johnson / Joe Berger to be on the offensive line? Who knows? So I think the Vikings' talent evaluation is better than average. Whether or not that means it's significantly better than average, I wouldn't say. But I also would not say that the indications of that lie in the fact that the Vikings are getting practice squad players signed by other teams. Especially because the one that just got signed, Rashawn Allen, was signed by the Seahawks. Then the Vikings signed him to the practice squad, and then the Seahawks signed him to the right roster again. So that doesn't even count. The Seahawks originally liked him. Those are the ones that got him back.
Is there any team performance metric for injuries? It seems that the Vikings generally stay more healthy than other teams, especially in our division. Is this due to training staff, practice style, or weight room work? I think we've talked in the past about how our training staff is either leads the league or is considered elite among training staffs in the league.
Yeah, so I wouldn't know about this year, and it sounds like this year isn't a good year for that in terms of the total statistic. But over the past 5 years, there have been about 4 or 5 teams. So I've done this. So there's a metric called adjusted games lost. To answer the first part of the question, adjusted games lost that is tracked by Football Outsiders. They put it out at the end of every year, so it's very difficult to like get a gauge on it mid-season relative to other teams. But it looks at how many starter games you've lost or close to starter games you've lost by injury, and it requires a lot of input from a lot of fans around the league because it helps them determine their calculations. But let's say you lose a quarterback, that's 16 games lost. You lost them at the very beginning of the year. If you lose a receiver who takes half your team snaps, that's 8 games lost, even if he's a starter, right? And so that's kind of how they do it. So if you lose a super sub, right? If you lose your nickel corner, Jack's Hackett, that's also right because they're functionally a starter. And so it allows you to gauge the relative impact of injuries without like overdoing the impact of injuries of guys who would have been on the practice squad or people that are being marked as injured so that other teams don't take them. Like Zach Lyon was last year. Yeah, he was injured, but they put him on injured reserve, functionally to protect him from being stolen from other teams. But it didn't really count because he didn't really, impact anything. So he didn't count for very many, if any, just against loss. So that's the first part of the question. The second part is that the Vikings are, in fact, you are accurate, one of the 4 teams whose injury luck is not random. If you take a look at sort of year-to-year jumps or troughs in healthiness for a team, almost every team, so about 28 teams, are random. There's no correlation year-to-year between them. It doesn't matter how many years. I mean, I've looked at it in 3-year samples, in multiple 3-year samples, in 5-year samples, and even a 7-year sample. And all of those teams are random. And so for the most part, people agree that injury luck is random. And that makes sense too. You can't control if someone lands awkwardly on your player's knee, right? But 2 teams are very bad at keeping their players healthy. There's the Indianapolis Colts and the Green Bay Packers. So relative to division, that's accurate. There are 2 teams that are very good at keeping their teams healthy. That's the San Francisco 49ers, who have a cooperation agreement with the Stanford University and their hospital there. And so they're pretty advanced in terms of nutrition and sports science. And the Minnesota Vikings, who just happen to have an excellent medical staff and a training staff and find ways to keep players healthy, I guess, which is pretty cool. One team seems to have bad injury luck, the Chicago Bears, because their quarterback consistently gets injured, but other players don't tend to get as injured as often, and so it kind of balances it out. The Detroit Lions had a run of bad injury luck, but for the most part are still one of the teams that are fairly random. So if it seems like the Vikings are consistently healthier than the rest of the division year to year, there's reasons to believe that, but some of those reasons are noise. But the Packers also do consistently get injured.
Good news for us, I suppose. On a scale of, oh, this is great. On a scale of the number of things Jay Cutler cares about to Bears point differential in the last 2 games. So 0 to 63.
That's great.
So -1 to about 63. How much more drama are we going to have to deal with as Vikings fans over the next 2 months?
Actually, this should have been the first question and this question should have been combined. It should have been: is there a metric that measures team drama adjusted for market size, and do the Vikings lead that metric?
Ooh, boy.
Right?
They're gonna like now that the Ray Rice thing has kind of taken a back seat, and we get to watch this process play out in kind of the midseason doldrums of the NFL. Yes, I think. What would you even call that statistic?
Probably like some sort of adjusted distraction metric. Probably adjusted distractions. Adjusted distractions.
ADF, adjusted distraction and frustration.
Yeah, there we go. Because what's the Vikings? When you go back to 2009, right? It's the Brett Favre saga, and then 2010 with the Brett Favre saga Part 2 came back with a vengeance.
The refarvening.
Refarvening. Plus, the Metrodoming, plus the seeds of the Joe Webb controversy, which that's fantastic. We didn't even think about 2010 as planting the seeds of the Joe Webb controversy, but it did, right? Because that was the year that they drafted him to be a wide receiver, and then they were like, oh, he has pretty good arm, so we'll make him a quarterback.
Oh, let's make him a quarterback. What the hell?
And so he played in a couple of games. He played in a game, actually, I think. But that was the Chicago game where Brett Favre, I believe, died on field. Thanks to Corey Wooten. It's wonderful, right?
Oh boy. He did die on the field. I actually have I think it's probably photoshopped, but video evidence of the chalk outline of Brett Favre
I think I produced that, actually. I think I made that video.
on the field. What would you like on your tombstone, Brett? Pepperoni and cheese.
So there's that, and then 2011 you've got Donovan McNabb and the Christian Ponder thing. 2012 you had the Adrian Peterson comeback, which is not drama. I wouldn't call it a distraction, so it wouldn't come in, but it was like a lot of media attention, right? 2013 was 2013, kind of blew up. He had a coach on the hot seat, but it was like whatever. But the 2013 offseason was insane because of Chris Cluey.
Oh man, that talk about massive distraction. That was a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and Cluey was like mouthy from the 2010 season on. There's another seed that we didn't even think of. The 2010 season wasn't just the seed for the Joe Webb controversy that showed up in 2012 and in 2011, honestly. But the Chris Cluey controversy, because
it was the start of his successful media career.
Yeah, which all coincided with the decline in his punting. Although one could argue that's not his fault, because that also coincided with Mike Prefer becoming the special teams coordinator in 2011.
But they were such good friends.
Yeah, Mike Prefer had no problems with him. That's true. But yeah, if you take a look at Chris Cluey's performance as a punter, if you take a look at sort of the 5 key punting statistics that Cluey thinks that you should look at, or if you look at Pro Football Focus grades or whatever, all of them decline when Mike Prefer starts coaching. So there is that. But yeah, then you've got the off season, which was excitingly dramatic, and then you've got the Adrian Peterson controversy. So I think that the Vikings, if you adjust it for a market size, right? Because then you've got the Jets can be appropriately discounted for their market. The Cowboys can be appropriately discounted for their market. It would make probably the Giants the least distraction-y team, because they're in the biggest market and don't have that many distractions, followed probably by the Patriots. But I think the Vikings would be up there.
Josh Fishmaster writes us with a couple of questions, also via the email. Does Chase Ford get open consistently? Is his performance somewhat repeatable?
For a receiving tight end, I think he gets open about as much as an average receiving tight end. Is his performance sustainable? I think so.
We agree that if Kyle Rudolph comes back, he's probably going to take snaps from Charles Johnson before he takes them from Chase Ford, right?
Yeah.
One of Josh's other questions, does Teddy's ball placement need as much work as I'm remembering from 2 weeks ago? In my foggy memory, it seems like not a lot of passes were caught in stride with much of a run after.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you remember. If you remember the first half of games, then yes, it needs pretty significant improvement. If you're remembering the second half of games, I don't know what you're talking about.
We just got to stay focused on second half Teddy. He's much better than first half Teddy.
I'd love to second half Teddy played in the first and second halves.
I know. We got to find second half Teddy and get him like an express like taxi or something to the stadium. We got to get him there in the first half.
Yeah.
I noticed Agiata ran with a different style last game. He was super low and ready to cat leap at the goal line. Seems like a big change from what he was doing last year.
A little bit. I mean, he is lower to the ground, I think. That's, I think, an accurate assessment. I still think he ran low last year, just not as low as he does this year. I think there's actually 2 influences to that. First, Adrian Peterson and his running back coach. No one minds Adrian Peterson's running style for some reason. I don't know what that is.
It's fine. It's just, it'll do.
But it's I mean, he's a high cut runner. I mean, he ran kind of high, and I think they just didn't coach you to run low. I think here they coach Vikings running backs to run low, and then also when you've got Jerick McKinnon who runs lower to the ground than anyone reasonably should. So I mean, that's related. I think the bigger difference in Asiata's running style is that last year he didn't drive with his legs as much as a power back should. This year he's doing a more consistent job of that, although I still think he's not doing as good a job as he should in that respect. So I don't think there's a significant change, but there's a couple of things that I think are like noticeable changes in the way that he runs, and I think that they're generally improvements.
Well, it looks like that's going to about do it, unless you have any parting shots, any wisdom or plugs you would like to leave us with before we adjourn for another football week.
No, I don't have anything, which is good because then that means this episode ends at about 1:30 because we had like a 30-minute aside at the beginning.
It wasn't that long. It was mostly just us complaining about the cold and reminiscing about growing up in North Dakota.
Complaining about people who complain about the cold because they didn't have to deal with what we dealt with.
Because we're that meta. We are children of the 21st century.
Unlike Sarah Palin.
Yeah. we choose not to live our lives in earnest. Ironic detachment helps us cope with the meaninglessness of postmodern life.
And also jobs.
Them too. Arif Hassan is at Arif Hassan NFL on Twitter. He is a senior writer for Vikings Journal, the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory, and an occasional contributor to the Daily Norseman, as well as co-host of Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which is produced by James Pogachnik at Big Mono on Twitter, and also by me, Dusty O'Connell. I am at Norse Code Dusty on Twitter. You can tweet the show at NorseCodeDN. You can email us, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. You can go to our website, norsecodepodcast.com, see all of our back catalog of episodes since we changed service providers, and check out our Norse Code Wall of Fame, where you can see all of the associate producers listed by closed envelope rank order by scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the Norse Code website, clicking on the little yellow PayPal donate button, and throwing your $5 into the hat, which we only ask that you do once, and then we can continue producing this mighty fine podcast for you every week. Any thoughts on guests for next week?
I already forgot who we're playing next week. Oh, it's the Packers. Let's bring Jumosk on.
Yeah, let's see if we can roust Justice Mosqueda on for next week's game against the Packers. He's great. We'd love to have him on again.
Talk about ironically detached Packers fans, right?
I know. You may actually be a nihilist.
Right.
That's not true. No nihilist can be that snappy of a dresser.
That's true.
If you're gonna invest that much in your own personal style, it evinces an attachment to this world and its trappings.
At least that's an ethos, man.
Say what you want. At least it's an ethos. Man's got to stand for something. For all of us here at Norse Code, our formula is this: Christian Ponder sucks. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.